Hey, life group leaders, small group leaders, people who help out in student ministry. Number one, I love you and I'm very thankful for you. And we have talked in the past about doing some training, and I've thought about different ways in which we could do this. And I think this would probably be the easiest way to get content to people. Would just be for me to record it and send it to you. It's hard to have designated times to meet and do those things. And my philosophy, as you know, with ministry is I don't want to meet to death. I don't want to have meetings unless there's a really good purpose for them. And so this way, you can also refer back to it. You can watch it once. You can watch it 5 times. Hopefully this will be helpful to you. So as we go along, I want to give you a few things that'll help you in this regard of leading a small group. So I don't want this to be insulting the intelligence or the experience of people who have led small groups for a long time. I just feel like these are some good pointers. And so I think it'll be helpful reminders to those who have been doing it for a long time. And also just good things to know if you're new to leading a small group. So one of the most important things that I think goes into this discussion is the idea that when you do a small group, you need to do a little bit of prep work beforehand. And I know sometimes you can't. Sometimes you go into a small group, and a small group is different than a Bible study. But in a small group setting, just when you're kind of talking about something that was done, like for instance on Wednesday nights when we have small groups, we're referring back to some stuff that happened in the service. And so for us, we just want to take those things, unpack those things, and kind of apply those to students' lives. And so you want to do as much upfront work as you can. You want to do at least a little bit of prep. And again, sometimes that's not possible, but if you can, some of that prep work is know the passage. Pay attention during the service. Make sure you're writing down stuff during the message to ask your students during the small group time. And even just thinking about, like, if you were in their shoes, what are some things that you wish would have been explained to you when you were their age relating to the topic at hand. The other thing too, and y'all do a great job at this, and we've always had a good heritage of this at our church, is just to know your students as best you can. Just to be involved in their life, to know things about them, to even, if you have a tough time remembering stuff, just write it down on your phone or on a notepad. Just know some things about their life. Have some things to bring up to them when you talk to them. I always try to make sure I have at least 1 or 2 just little things I can bring up with students as I talk to them, or even just people in general. I want to have some connection point with them, even if it's just silly and insignificant like Star Wars, or even stuff I'm not interested in like Star Wars or football. Those things are important to them, and I want to make sure I have some way to connect with them. And then this is the most important thing I want to tell you. So if you get nothing else from any of this, this is it right here. Are you ready? Zero in right now. There's a rule in leading small groups, and that is different than Bible studies. So small groups, there is a 70-30 principle. 70-30 principle. I learned this from my student pastor growing up. He said, if you're leading a group, like a discussion group, a small group, anything with students that's not just like a lecture style Bible study, you want them to talk 70% of the time. You want to talk about 30% of the time. So I'll repeat, you want to talk about 30% of the time. You want the students to talk about 70% of the time. And now, I know that can be hard. I know that's not an easy task. I know it's hard to get them talking. And in some classes it's easier than others. Some classes you're thinking they're going to talk 99% of the time, and it's getting them to be quiet that's the problem. And so we just want to work as hard as we can to ask good questions, to really think about thought-provoking questions, to allow different people to answer. If you got one kid that's dominating, try to shift the attention a little bit. Let them talk, but at the same time, find a way to let the other students talk during that time. And sometimes you got to be just real honest with them. Hey, why don't you let somebody else answer? And so if you're thinking about how do I get kids to talk 70% of the time if we've got 20 minutes to talk, one of the things we need to do is we need to think really hard about the questions we're asking. Don't ask yes or no questions. Don't ask questions with a really, really simple answer or like a one-line answer and that's it. Ask questions that are a little more open-ended. Like use things from the message to ask questions to them that really open up a discussion instead of saying, specifically what did this, what was this specific answer, say, essentially, What do you think that meant, and could there be other meanings to it? Or how does this apply to your life? Or could you see this applying to somebody else? Or there's all kinds of different ways to do it. Just be careful when you're crafting your questions that you ask ones that are a little more open-ended and that are more discussion-style questions rather than just yes or no, or there's one specific answer like, who was Moses' brother? The answer to that's Aaron. But if you're wanting to talk more about that, be like, well, since Aaron is Moses' brother, what are some things about Aaron that really stood out to you that are really interesting about him? Just a way to kind of get into a discussion rather than just having some just kind of surface level point by point knowledge. You need to allow a little bit of room, not much, but a little bit of room for rabbit chasing. And the reason I say this is if you go into a small group and everything is just all business and there's no ability for students just to kind of be themselves for a minute, that can be tough on them. So they need to have like a moment to open up. And then when you open a small group discussion with students, I would encourage you to always have some kind of small, very brief icebreaker, just in a way to let each one of them vocalize something, like even if you know them really well, just a way for each one of them to get comfortable in the room, for them to settle down for a second, to kind of get focused, and then for them to launch into an actual discussion. And so that transition is really important. And then this is one of the last things. Be really careful if there's a kid like I was when I was in middle school, not to make them feel dumb for asking weird questions, especially if you're dealing with middle schoolers. We know, if you lead a small group for middle schoolers, that there's going to be some strange questions come up, because that's just a place in life they are, and that's okay. But always remember, and I know y'all don't do this, but this is a really good reminder. If they ask a silly question, and other kids start laughing or whatever, just try to redirect that. We need to always be careful not to be making students feel silly and sometimes what they do is silly, let's just be honest. But if we can do our best to make sure that we don't make them feel dumb or silly for doing something, even if it was dumb or silly what they did, to always make sure that they don't feel ostracized by the group that they're in as best as we can help it. And this is the very last thing. Make sure that when they leave the room, that you have clearly connected that discussion to the main point of the message that they just heard. So in small groups, you're really just unpacking what has been said in the sermon and applying it to their life. So make sure they have something tangible they can walk away with to say, this is how this particular discussion ties back to the sermon or the message that we just heard. So hope this has been helpful for you. I want to try to send these out periodically just to be helpful to you. I love you guys. So thankful for you. Could not do this without you. And I know that God is using you in your classes, in your small groups, and He's going to continue to do so. So we love you. See you next time.